There is a cave under the New Mexico desert that has been sealed off for 4 million years. In 2016, a team at McMaster University published a paper in Nature Communications about a single bacterium pulled out of it. The strain is called Penibacillus LC231. It is resistant to 26 of the 40 antibiotics tested against it. One of those is daptomycin, approved for human use in 2003. The bacterium has never encountered a person, a hospital, or a pharmaceutical. It was sealed underground before the human species existed. It was already immune. 300 meters under a mine in Chihuahua, Mexico, there is a room full of crystals longer than a city bus. The largest measure 11.4 meters and weigh around 55 tons, the load of a fully freighted articulated lorry. The chamber sits at 58 degrees Celsius in near total humidity. In that air, the human body cannot shed heat by sweating. Survival time without a cooling suit runs to about 10 minutes. In 2015, the mining company shut off its pumps. The water came back. Nobody has seen the crystals since. In the Afar region of Ethiopia, there are ponds with a negative pH. They sit 125 meters below sea level, on ground lower than any other dry land in Africa, and they reach 108 degrees Celsius. A French and Spanish team led by Purificación El Pez Garca of the French National Center for Scientific Research surveyed them and published the results in Nature Ecology and Evolution in 2019. There is water, there is heat, there is nothing alive in it. Beneath Reactor 4 at Chernobyl there is a room nobody has entered since 1986. It is designated 305/2. It holds an estimated 60 tons of uranium, roughly the weight of 9 African elephants, buried under collapsed concrete. Sensors in the shelter count neutrons, and neutrons mean fission. Between 2016 and 2020, the count in that room nearly doubled. Richard Stone reported it in Science in May 2021. The reaction is not winding down. This is our countdown of the 15 places on Earth that even scientists cannot explain. Stay until the end, because number 1 is that cave bacterium. The paper that sequenced it found 5 resistance mechanisms with no known counterpart anywhere. Drop a comment telling us where you are watching from right now. We want to see how many countries this video reaches. At number 15, blood falls on the Taylor Glacier in Antarctica. For half a century, the red was blamed on alga. It is iron. The geologist Griffith Taylor found the stain in 1911 during Scott's Terra Nova expedition. The brine seeps out of the glacier snout above the frozen west lobe of Lake Bonny in the McMurdo Dry Valleys. It carries roughly twice the salinity of seawater. It flows at about -6 degrees Celsius, out of ice with a mean annual air temperature of -17. Jill Mikuki, then at Dartmouth, published the Biology and Science in 2009. The brine holds a microbial community running on iron and sulfate, with no sunlight and no oxygen. Sealed off for something like 1.5 million years. That is old enough that the reservoir closed while Homo erectus was still the most advanced species on the planet. The temperature is the harder question. Water at -6 should not move through solid ice. Jessica Badgley of Colorado College and Aaron Pettit of the University of Alaska Fairbanks mapped the route with radio echo sounding, publishing in the Journal of Glaciology in 2017. The brine travels roughly 90 meters inside the glacier, the length of a football pitch, without freezing solid. As it partially freezes, it releases latent heat, and that heat keeps its own channel open. Mikuki's airborne survey in Nature Communications in 2015 traced brine-soaked sediment at least 6 kilometers upstream, an hour's walk, all of it under ice. Even the color was wrong. A study in Frontiers in Astronomy and Space Sciences in 2023 identified the pigment as nanospheres of amorphous iron-rich material, not the crystalline iron oxide everyone had assumed. The site is now Antarctic Specially Protected Area 172. Entry is by permit and clean entry protocol only. Nobody has reached the reservoir itself. At number 14, Ilha da Queimada Grande off the coast of São Paulo State, Brazil. The Brazilian Navy patrols this island. It is not protecting the mainland. The island covers 43 hectares, about 60 football pitches, sitting some 33 kilometers offshore. It holds the entire world population of Bothrops insularis, the golden lancehead. Rising sea levels around 11,000 years ago cut the island off and stranded a pit viper population, with no ground-dwelling prey left to hunt. The snakes switched to migrating birds. A bird struck on the ground simply flies off and dies out of reach, so selection favored speed. Fieldwork by Otavio Marquise of the Instituto Butantan in São Paulo, published in Herpetologica and later in the South American Journal of Herpetology, describes a venom estimated at 3 to 5 times more potent than the mainland Jararaca. The famous number attached to this island is 1 snake per square meter. That number is wrong. Butantan's surveys put the actual population somewhere between 2,000 and 4,000 animals, and falling. The species is listed as critically endangered. Access is controlled by ICM Bio, the Chico Mendes Institute for Biodiversity Conservation, and expeditions must travel with a medical officer carrying antivenom. Poachers still take animals for collectors, at prices that have reached thousands of dollars per snake. Almost no human being has ever been bitten by a golden lancehead. What the venom does to a person is inferred from other animals, never measured. 2,000 snakes. 1 island. No landing permitted. At number 13, the Batagaika Megaslump, Sakha Republic, Russia. Climate change did not open this. A road did. Soviet forestry crews cleared the slope near the town of Batagaika in the 1960s. The trees had been insulating the ground. Without them, the ice-rich permafrost below began to melt. The surface collapsed, and each collapse exposed fresh ice to the sun. The gash is now about 1 kilometer long and up to 100 meters deep, a 30-story drop into frozen mud. Kizyakov and colleagues measured the growth rate in the journal Geomorphology in 2024 at roughly 1 million cubic meters a year. That is 400 Olympic swimming pools of ground disappearing every summer. The head wall is a cross-section of deep time. Julian Merton of the University of Sussex dated the exposed sequence in quaternary research in 2017 and found ice complex deposits reaching back around 650,000 years. That layer was laid down before Neanderthals, before Denisovans, before anatomically modern humans. Ksenia Ashastina reconstructed the vanished steppe from the same wall and climate of the past. The things coming out of it are not only sediment. A mummified foal roughly 42,000 years old, bison, horses, mammoth in 2023, Jean-Michel Clavery's group at Aix-Marseille University published work in the journal Viruses describing an amoeba virus revived from Yakutian permafrost after 48,500 years. It was still infectious. No engineering method exists to stop a retrogressive thaw slump once it starts. The Yakut name for the site translates as the cave-in. It runs until it hits bedrock. At number 12, the Sima de los Huesos. In the Atapuerca Hills near Burgos, Spain, in most cave deposits the bones are animal. In this shaft they are almost all human. The pit lies at the base of a 13-meter vertical drop, a 4-story fall with no ledge, roughly 500 meters inside the Cueva Mayor system. Juan Luis Arzuaga of the Universidad Complutense de Madrid has directed the excavation since the 1980s. The count now exceeds 6,700 hominin fossils, from a minimum of 28 individuals. Arnold and colleagues dated the assemblage to about 430,000 years in the Journal of Human Evolution in 2014. That predates the earliest known Homo sapiens by roughly 100,000 years. There is no hearth, no living debris, no sign of carnivores dragging carcasses in. 1 quartzite hand axe was recovered from the entire deposit, nicknamed Excalibur. The genetics did not settle it. They split it. Matthias Meyer of the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology sequenced mitochondrial DNA and published in Nature in 2013. It came back closest to Denisovans, a population known from a cave in Siberia. 3 years later, in Nature again, his team sequenced nuclear DNA from the same site. That came back Neanderthal. The 2 results have been reconciled by hypothesis, not by evidence. Nohemi Sala's team examined 1 specimen, cranium 17, and published in PLOS 1 in 2015. 2 fractures above the left eye, struck by the same object at the same angle. 28 bodies. one hand axe. A 13-meter drop above them. At number 11, the Shanai Timpishka. In the Ucayali region of the Peruvian Amazon, Andres Rouge asked the oil companies, the government geologists, and his own faculty. Every one of them said no. Boiling rivers occur near volcanoes. The Amazon basin has none. The nearest active volcanic center sits more than 700 kilometers away, roughly the distance from London to Munich. Rouge, then a doctoral student at Southern Methodist University building Peru's first detailed heat flow map, went in with his aunt in 2011 and reached the community of Mayantuyacu, about 4 hours by rough road from Pucallpa. He measured the water. It averaged 86 degrees Celsius along a stretch of 6.4 kilometers. A 40-minute walk beside water hot enough to poach an egg. The channel runs up to 25 meters wide. He documented the work in his book The Boiling River, published by TED Books in 2016. The Ashninka name translates roughly as boiled with the heat of the sun. Animals that fall and cook. The eyes go first. The heat source is not volcanic. That is the part still open. The working model is deep hydrothermal circulation. Rain infiltrates far upstream, possibly in the Andes, sinks along fault lines, is warmed by ordinary crustal heat, and returns fast enough to arrive near boiling. Rouge has argued, without contradiction from other geothermal scientists, that it is the largest documented non-volcanic thermal river system on Earth. Riley Fortier of the University of Miami led further study of the system in 2022. The volume of hot water is too large for a narrow conduit. A broad recharge zone has to exist. It has never been found. At number 10, Mount Erebus. On Ross Island, Antarctica, Klauia emits more gold than Erebus. Etna emits more still. Erebus stands 3,794 meters above the ice and holds a convecting lava lake of anorthoclase faunolite that has been active without interruption since at least 1972. Kimberly Meeker, Philip Kyle and colleagues at the New Mexico Institute of Mining and Technology sampled the crater snow, the plume, and the Antarctic air, and published in Geophysical Research Letters in 1991. All three sets contained gold. The output runs to roughly 80 grams a day, a small handful of coins, scattered across an area the size of Western Europe. Particles have been recovered 1,000 kilometers from the summit. The quantity is not what makes it strange. The shape is. Under an electron microscope, the particles are not irregular specks. They are faceted crystals, some up to 60 micrometers across, near the width of a human hair. Erebus is the only volcano on record emitting crystalline elemental gold. The gas carries too little gold for crystals to nucleate spontaneously in air. Philip Kyle, who has run more than 50 seasons on the mountain, proposed instead that they form in a crust on the lava lake and are lifted out by rising gas. 35 years on, neither model has been demonstrated. The summit fumaroles build towers of ice up to 10 meters high, 3 stories of chimney at minus 30 degrees. Bradley Tebow's team found chemosynthetic microbes inside them, reported in Frontiers in Microbiology in 2015, with a large share of sequences matching nothing in any database. The ground is Antarctic Specially Protected Area 175. On the 28th of November, 1979, Air New Zealand Flight 901 struck the lower slope, killing 257 people. The site was declared tapu. Remains are still on the mountain. At number 9, the Runit Dome, on Eniwetok Atoll in the Marshall Islands. Between 1977 and 1980, around 4,000 American servicemen scraped contaminated soil off the atoll and poured it into a hole. The hole was a bomb crater. The Cactus Test, an 18-kiloton detonation on the 5th of May, 1958, had blown it open. Crews mixed the soil with cement, filled the crater, and capped it with concrete roughly 45 centimeters thick and 115 meters across, longer than a football pitch. The Department of Energy's report to Congress in June 2020 puts the contents at over 100,000 cubic yards, about 85,000 cubic meters, or 35 Olympic swimming pools of radioactive debris. The crater floor was never lined. Beneath it is porous coral reef. Locals call it the tomb. The dome is photographed constantly. It is also the wrong thing to photograph. Ken Buseler and Matt Charette of the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution measured groundwater flow and plutonium isotope signatures across the atoll and published in Science of the Total Environment in 2017. Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory's assessment puts the transuranic activity sealed inside the containment structure at roughly 545 gigabecquerels. The transuranic activity already sitting in the sediments of Eniwetok Lagoon outside the dome exceeds 67,000 gigabecquerels. More than 100 times as much plutonium is loose on the lagoon floor as is under the concrete. Plutonium-239 has a half-life of 24,000 years. That is 4 times the length of recorded human history. Runit Island is uninhabited and closed. No agency has ever surveyed the crater floor beneath the waste. The structure was built as a temporary measure and has no long-term custodian. At number 8, the Zone Rouge. Around Verdun in the Meuse, France, 9 villages inside it still have mayors. None of them have residents. France classified roughly 1,200 square kilometers as unfit for human habitation after 1918. Around 100 square kilometers remain in the highest restriction category, an area close to the size of Paris inside the Prefrique. Fleury-Devant-Douaumont, Ornes, and 7 others were never rebuilt. They remain legal communes, each governed by a council appointed by the prefect. The shelling is not what keeps the ground closed. The disposal is. In the interwar years, captured German chemical shells were destroyed by open burning in dedicated trenches. Burning arsenical agents does not remove the arsenic, it concentrates it in the ash. At one clearing in the Spincourt forest, known as the Place Gaz, an estimated 200,000 shells were burned. Tobias Bausinger, Eric Bonner and Johannes Preu sampled the soil and published in Science of the Total Environment in 2007. Arsenic reached 176 grams per kilogram, 17% of the soil. By weight, the clearing is about 70 meters across, the width of a football pitch, and it is bare. Gray ground in the middle of a healthy forest. Nothing has grown there since 1928. Estimates for natural recovery run to several hundred years. The site was only fenced in the last decade. Before that, hikers and mushroom pickers walked across it. The French Department du Binage still recovers hundreds of tons of ordnance a year. There is no complete record of what was burned, or where. At number 7, Dallol, in the Danakil Depression of the Afar region, Ethiopia. The hot springs here are not merely acidic. Several have been measured below 0 on the pH scale. The field sits 125 meters below sea level, on ground lower than anywhere else in Africa, in one of the hottest inhabited regions on the planet. A shallow magma body heats groundwater, which then passes upward through kilometers of salt, potash, and sulfur. The result stacks extremes on top of each other: hyperacidity, salt saturation, temperatures to 108 degrees Celsius, and brines dominated by magnesium. Jody Balila, David Morera, and Purificasin Elpez Garca of the French National Center for Scientific Research sampled along those gradients and published in Nature Ecology and Evolution in 2019. Diverse archaea live in the desert and the salt canyons around the site. In the pools themselves and in the magnesium-rich black and yellow lakes, they found no microbial life at all. Wind and visitors seed those ponds with microbes constantly. Nothing takes hold. A separate team published a competing result in scientific reports the same year, reporting nano-hollow archaea inside the pools. The two findings have never been reconciled. The second problem is worse than the first. Elpez Garca's group documented silica-rich precipitates forming spontaneously in the brines that look, under a microscope, like cells. They are minerals. Nobody has gone back through the published microfossil record from other extreme environments to check. Access requires government permits and armed escort. The ponds shift week to week. The ones that were sterile in 2019 may not be the ponds that are there now. If you have made it this far, hit subscribe. The top 6 go further. A lake with enough dissolved gas to kill 2 million people in one night. A chamber of crystals that grew for 1 million years and is now back underwater, and a sealed room at Chernobyl where the fission rate is climbing. At number 6, Lake Kivu, on the border between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo. In 1986, Lake Nyos in Cameroon released a cloud of carbon dioxide overnight and killed at least 1,700 people. George Kling's team reported it in Science in 1987. Kivu holds roughly 1,000 times more gas than Nyos held. The lake covers 2,700 square kilometers, about the area of Luxembourg, and reaches 485 meters deep. Klaus Tietze ran the first full dissolved gas survey in 1974. His figures are still the standard ones. Around 300 cubic kilometers of carbon dioxide and 60 cubic kilometers of methane are held in the deep water. Roughly 2 million people live on the shoreline, in Goma, Rubavu and Bukavu. Nyiragongo, which erupted in 2002 and again in 2021, stands 22 kilometers from the northern shore. The gas stays down because the lake is permanently stratified. It does not turn over. If that stratification breaks, gas comes out of solution, and every bubble lowers the pressure on the water beneath it. Martin Schmid and Alfred West of AWOG, the Swiss Federal Institute of Aquatic Science and Technology, reported in Geochemistry, Geophysics, Geosystems in 2005 that methane had risen about 15% since Tietze's survey, and that the risk was increasing. In 2020, Fabian Brenbold led a multi-instrument comparison campaign off Gisenyi and published in PLOS 1. That team could not verify the increase. The two best assessments of the lake disagree. The Kivu Watt platform now extracts methane for power. Extraction means pumping deep water up, stripping the gas, and returning the water. Return it at the wrong depth, and the stratification erodes. At number 5, Movile Cave, near Mangalia in Constanta County, Romania. In 1986, workers drilling a site survey for a power plant broke into a void. The void was full of animals. The cave had been sealed from the surface for roughly 5.5 million years. That is longer than the genus Homo has existed, by a factor of 2. Urban Serbu, working with Thomas Kane and Brian Kinkle, published the finding in Science in 1996 under the title A, Chemoautotrophically Based Cave Ecosystem. 51 animal species have now been cataloged inside. 34 of them exist nowhere else on Earth. Blind water scorpions, cave leeches, a centipede found in no other place. Nothing down there eats plants. Nothing down there has seen light. The base of the food web is a floating microbial mat on a sulfurous lake. Bacteria oxidize hydrogen sulfide and methane rising from below and fix carbon from that chemistry. Every animal in the cave eats the mat, or eats something that ate the mat. Follow-up work by Kumarasan, Serbu and colleagues in the ISME Journal and Environmental Microbiology traced the methanotrophs and the nitrogen fixation. The air holds around 10% oxygen, half the surface concentration, with elevated carbon dioxide and hydrogen sulfide. Entry runs through a 20-meter vertical shaft, a 6-story drop, then a crawl, then a free dive through submerged passage into air pockets beyond. Christian Lascu made the first of those dives. The Emil Rakovi Institute of Speleology in Bucharest issues a handful of permits a year. Fewer than 200 people have ever been inside. At number 4, the Cueva de los Cristales in the Naica mine, Chihuahua, Mexico, in April 2000. Two brothers driving an exploratory tunnel 300 meters down broke through a wall. Behind it was a room full of beams. Selenite, the largest, measure 11.4 meters, longer than a city bus, at diameters near a meter, and weights around 55 tons. Juan Manuel Garca Ruiz of the Spanish National Research Council and the Universidad de Granada published the formation mechanism in the journal Geology in 2007. A magma body below had held the groundwater at almost exactly 58 degrees Celsius, the transition point where anhydrite converts to gypsum. Held at that boundary, crystals do not nucleate quickly. They simply keep growing. The size is not the difficult number. The rate is. Alexander Van Driesch's team measured growth at about 1.4 times 10 to the minus 5 nanometers per second, published in Science in 2011. That is the slowest natural crystal growth ever recorded. At that rate, a crystal thickens by the width of a human hair roughly every 160 years. The largest beams are around 1 million years old. They grew that entire time in darkness, underwater at 58 degrees. Penelope Boston, then at New Mexico Tech and later director of the NASA Astrobiology Institute, recovered microbes from fluid inclusions sealed inside the crystals. She reported them at the AAS meeting in 2017 as dormant for 10,000 to 50,000 years, with most unmatched to known genera. That work has not appeared in a peer-reviewed journal. The chamber was only enterable because Industrious Peels was pumping the mine dry. The dry air was cracking the crystals. In 2015, the pump stopped. The cave is underwater again. At number 3, Room 305/2, beneath Reactor 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, Ukraine. The new safe confinement was supposed to end this. The 1986 explosion drove the ceiling of that room down by almost 4 meters and sent about 100 tons of corium into the basement. Corium is melted fuel fused with zirconium, sand, and concrete. An IAEA report from 1998, drawing on Borovoy and colleagues, put the fuel in this single room at 60 tons of uranium or more, roughly half the entire buried mass and about the weight of 9 African elephants. The arch went up in 2016 at a cost near 1.5 billion euros. It kept the rain out. Neutron counts under it fell or held steady almost everywhere. In 305/2 they began to climb. Anatoly Doroshenko and Maxim Savelyev of the Institute for Safety Problems of Nuclear Power Plants in Kiev reported the trend in 2021. Richard Stone wrote it up in Science on the 5th of May that year. The count nearly doubled over 4 years. Rising neutrons mean fission. The Institute's modeling attributes it to the fuel gradually drying out under the new roof. Neil Hyatt of the University of Sheffield described the material as smoldering like embers in a barbecue pit. Savelyev's own summary was that there are many uncertainties, and an accident cannot be ruled out. Plant managers have stated they have not yet worked out how to reach the material under the debris. There is no access route. There is no intervention available. The sensors keep counting. At number 2, Gas Emission Crater 1 on the Yamal Peninsula in Russia. In July 2014, a helicopter crew flying near the Bovinenkovo gas field radioed in a hole in the tundra. It measured about 20 meters across at the inner opening, with an ejector rim near 40, and dropped more than 50 meters. That is a 16-story building punched into flat ground where the tallest object for 100 kilometers is a drilling rig. Frozen debris had been thrown hundreds of meters outward. This was not a collapse. The ground went up. Vasily Bogoyevlensky of the Oil and Gas Research Institute at the Russian Academy of Sciences and Evgeny Chuvalin of the Skolkovo Institute of Science and Technology led the fieldwork. Boldovich, Chuvalin and colleagues published in Scientific Reports in 2018 under the title Cryovolcanism on the Earth. Methane accumulates under pressure beneath ice-rich permafrost, from destabilizing gas hydrates or from deep reservoirs, until the frozen cap fails. 8 of these have been confirmed. That is the total, worldwide, ever. All 8 sit on the Yamal and Gaidin peninsulas. Nowhere else in the circumpolar permafrost belt has produced one, and the reason is unresolved. A preprint circulated in 2024 and later work in Science of the Total Environment argue for conditions specific to those 2 peninsulas. The count is the part that cannot be fixed. Within about 2 years, a fresh crater fills with water and becomes indistinguishable from the thousands of ordinary thermokarst lakes scattered across the tundra. No model predicts where the next one opens. The peninsula is a closed industrial zone. Bovinenkovo is Gazprom's largest field, and it sits inside the affected area. At number 1, Lechuguilla Cave. In Carlsbad Caverns National Park, New Mexico. For 70 years it was a small bat guano pit. In 1986, cavers dug into rubble at the bottom because air was blowing out of it. What opened up runs more than 240 kilometers of surveyed passage and 489 meters deep. That is the driving distance from New York to Baltimore, folded into a hill, dropping further below the surface than the Empire State Building stands above it. The cave was not carved from above by rainwater. Hydrogen sulfide rising from petroleum deposits below met oxygenated groundwater and made sulfuric acid, which ate the passages out of the limestone from the bottom up. Those passages have been cut off from the surface for over 4 million years. Hazel Barton of the University of Akron went down and collected samples. Gerard Wright's laboratory at McMaster University sequenced them. The bacterium was not supposed to be resistant to anything. Andrew Pulowski, with Barton, Andrew MacArthur and Wright, published in Nature Communications on the 8th of December, 2016. Paenobacillus LC 231 resisted 26 of the 40 antibiotics tested. The genome carried 18 chromosomal resistance elements. 5 of them have no characterized counterpart anywhere. One of the drugs it defeated was daptomycin, approved for clinical use in 2003. The organism was sealed underground before Australopithecus, before the first stone tools, before the genus Homo. It has never met a human being, a hospital, or a manufactured drug. An earlier survey by Buller and Wright in PLOS 1 in 2012 had already found multi-drug resistance throughout the cave. The National Park Service has kept Lechuguilla closed since 1986. Permits go to survey and research teams only, and the standing rule underground is that nothing gets touched. 4 million years. 26 of 40. 5 mechanisms nobody can name. 15 places. A waterfall in Antarctica running red out of solid ice. An island of vipers the Navy guards from collectors. A hole in Siberia that a logging road started and nothing can stop. 28 bodies at the bottom of a Spanish shaft with one hand axe among them. A river in the Amazon at 86 degrees with no volcano behind it. A volcano throwing crystallized gold onto Antarctic snow. A concrete dome in the Pacific that is not where the plutonium is. A clearing near Verdun where nothing has grown since 1928. Ponds in Ethiopia with water in them and nothing living. A lake in Rwanda holding 300 cubic kilometers of carbon dioxide under 2 million people. A Romanian cave running on sulfur instead of sunlight. A room of crystals in Chihuahua that is underwater again. A sealed basement at Chernobyl where the neutron count keeps rising. 8 craters in Siberia, and no way to count the ones that filled in. And a cave bacterium immune to a drug invented in 2003. Every one of these was measured. The measurement is what opened the question. Which of these places would you least want to stand next to? Tell us in the comments. And if you made it to the end, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. The next one goes somewhere they will not let anyone stand.